After the tone, please record your name, followed by hash. Thank you.
During my degree, we were asked to read a book called How to Lie with Statistics, which approaches statistics as if you were trying to hide something or make something look better than it really is, heaven forbid. And statistics are really very similar to analytics. The book itself is very compelling and makes observations about statistics in newspapers and advertising that are as true today as they were in the 50s when he wrote the book. In those days, people with access to statistics were specialists with PhDs and access to large number-crunching budgets. But nowadays, with tools like Tableau and Yellowfin, almost anybody can get access to statistical analysis tools. And I'm not always sure they're gaining the insights that they think they're getting, but rather confirming beliefs that they already had. As Darrell Huff quotes in his preface, it ain't so much the things that we don't know that get us into trouble, it's the things that we know that just ain't so. And that was a quote from another guy called Artemus Ward. But this is a great book, and I'd recommend it to anyone that is starting out with statistics and analytics. In a chapter called How to Talk Back to a Statistic, he outlines 5 questions you can help discern if a statistic is misleading or not. So the first question he will always ask is, who is generating the statistic? What system is generating the statistics, and what is that coming from? So is there any bias or anything of that nature? So that's what we try and find out.
Your line has been muted.
Muting some of the other participants. So that is there. So apologies, just putting some people on mute. So the first question, who says so? The next question is, how do they know? How did they collect that data? So that's another question that's very important, and you'll need experts in the field to do that. So what's missing? This is another question that's asked, and in summarizing data, you inevitably lose some information. And it's very important to know what information has been summarized and what information is missing. So we're going to have a look at those as well. So did somebody change the subject is the fourth question, and that's where people are relying on statistics and using a statistic that isn't related to the conclusion that they've made. So we'll have a look at some examples of that. And then the final one is just a common sanity check, just to make sure that things make sense. Let's not rely on statistics and analytics blindly. So that's the last question. So those are the 5 questions. We're going to have a look at some mistakes in relation to those questions. So I've also been speaking to our resident data scientist, whose name is Murali Mohan, who's given me some examples of the mistakes he's seen when implementing analytic solutions with companies like Skyscanner and Accenture that he was at before. And of course, with IPscape, where we're close to the release of our new IPscape analytics tool. So he's been working hard on that, and we've got some examples. So what we're going to do is go to the first question, and I'm just going to move on to that in a moment. So let's go to that. Okay, so moving on to the first question. So who says so? Who's generating these statistics? So, and are they likely to be biased? So generally speaking, there are 2 types of bias. There's the conscious type and unconscious bias. So with conscious bias, this is like a CEO who's trying to make the figures look good for his shareholders. And and is using a particular metric as the focus for the contact center. So these are, generally speaking, things like the grade of service metrics, like service levels or first call resolution. So service levels, as I'm sure you're aware, is the percentage of calls that are generally answered, that are answered within 20 seconds. So another one, the commonly used one, is the first call resolution. We've seen some ways that this can be manipulated. Certainly within IPscape, you can set different service levels per campaign, and it's important that any statistical analysis that you do, that it's clear what the service levels are for each campaign. So I've seen up to 50 seconds on some service levels, and that is clearly a much easier target to hit than the standard 20 seconds. But when you see the statistic, you will only see the big headline number, which is the percentage. So you've got to be aware of that. You can also manipulate it further by not including numbers like people that only gave you 10 seconds to answer the call. So you don't include people who hung up within 10 seconds or something like that. So that's general, but you can increase that number. So you need to be clear on what the service level is doing. And this can be a conscious bias to deliberately deceive, but if you're using dashboards and that sort of thing, you just make it clear on the dashboard what it is that you're, what the actual seconds are, and what have you. So the other thing we came across with one of our clients was first call resolution. So with that one, they were using our auto wrap code feature, which was basically when you give your agents a certain amount of time to wrap a call. If they don't, you just give them a code automatically. So what this company was doing was using resolved on first, and they didn't, they weren't deliberately trying to mislead on this. It was just that was the code that they were using, and obviously this skewed the first call resolution statistic. And it's just, you need to have people on the ground that know how this works and understand these biases. So that's that. That's the conscious type. The unconscious is where we've seen this with technically proficient users, where they're using metrics because they're easy to calculate, they understand them, and they are statistically elegant or something like that, whereas rather than actually factually useful. And we saw this with our average handle time, which is easy to get the numbers for, and it's a useful number, but in isolation, it's not necessarily the best number. And just because it's easy to generate doesn't necessarily mean that you should use that as a metric. And with these dashboards, you don't have to. So what we've tried to do with our analytics program is produce statistics and dashboards that make sense and allow you to see the numbers in relation to the figures behind them. So we've got the headline figure here for the service level, and you can drill down into that and just have a look at the numbers that it relates to by going into it, by clicking on it. So this hasn't been released yet, and will be early next year, but this is the kind of thing that it makes more sense, where you've got where you can see the service levels and that kind of thing next door to call activity. And we're trying to make the statistics themselves tell a story. So no one statistic is golden. So moving on to Daryl Huff's second question, which is how do they know? How do we get these figures? And to get these figures, it's always a good thing to do. If we drill down into the service level, we can see that actually most of our service levels are pretty high, but we've got some that are particularly low and that are dragging down our the center as a whole. So you can see that next door to here. And on this tabled information beyond the statistic, the headline statistic, you can have all of the other things like what is the service level, how many seconds are we doing that, and you can drill into these figures quite a lot. So these are standard ones that we're giving that have been developed by a data scientist, and you can see lots of things here. So you've got the service level along with call activity, along with conversion ratios generated from the wrap codes, and we've got activities here as well. So these are the headline numbers, and you can drill down into them. So that's the how does he know. So what's missing? So again, this what's missing number is stuff like the missing seconds and the short call duration. All of that can be gathered by drilling down into the information. So the next question. So we're on the third question there. The fourth one is, did somebody change the subject? An example of changing the subject is making conclusions after looking at just one statistic. So, for example, I'm going to use average handle time, and this can be caused by a lot of things. So it can be caused by slow computer systems. It can be a lack of a unified desktop, ineffective routing, poor agent training, high turnover, long stretches on hold, and overly complex processes. So any one of these reasons may be why we've got an average handle time that's long, but it may not be the reason. What we need is other statistics around it, like the call volumes and what have you. And hopefully with dashboards, you're going to be able to get the full story with those. So if your average handle time is dropping, but your calls are going up, there may be they may just be getting, your agents may be completing calls before they're actually finished. So that's not necessarily a great statistic, but it's a useful one in the relation to a dashboard. It's just a section of tools that you can use. So finally, the last one is, does it make sense? Do our statistics make sense? And that's just a sanity check that you need to not rely blindly on the statistics. And that's Darrell Huff's final word of wisdom on that, on those kinds of statistics. So those are the sort of 5 areas that I think you should question statistics on. I hope you found it useful, and I'd like to finish up with a quote from H.G. Wells, who was a great future-seeing writer, and he said, statistical thinking will one day be as necessary for efficient citizenship as the ability to read and write. And I think we're seeing this come true with Google Analytics and all of the analytics stuff that we're seeing around us everywhere. Everyone is able to get access to this, and hopefully with a bit more understanding of the numbers themselves, we can run better businesses and more efficient ones. So thank you very much for joining this month's webinar. I hope it was useful, and I'll see you at the next one.